Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the FearCast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss. I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode. This is a fun episode. So we're not doing a question today, but I do have the honor, the privilege, the fun to have Mubeena Mirza on to talk about scrupulosity, religious scrupulosity within a Muslim community, and particularly in anticipation of Ramadan. So the month of Ramadan is coming up for for Muslims, for the Muslims that are practicing this. I was going to say a lot of Muslims. It's coming for all Muslims, but for some who are going to participate or not, this is the weirdest way to possibly start this, and here we are. So I was able to get Mubeena on, to chat about this. Love having her on to talk about her experience, her knowledge, her care, her passion for the Muslim community. And it's also a great opportunity for folks who don't have religious scrupulosity to learn about another way that OCD can manifest. And ultimately, a lot of the same stuff that we're talking about in this episode applies to pretty much everybody else who has OCD, who has anxiety, who has religious scrupulosity. Yeah, it's going to be talking about maybe a subject or a particular topic or the way that it manifests or the content of the obsession slightly differently. However, OCD is OCD. We've talked about this before. It's all kind of the same, and we ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to be treating it the same. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So, I've asked her before, if you have particular questions that Mubeena can help answer. As you know, the FearCast is a question and answer based podcast. My goal here is to answer your questions. You can message me over at fearcastpodcast.com. You can send me a audio question over at FearCast Podcast. You can also send me an audio question over at Instagram. I am FearCast Podcast over there, so check me out over there. And send me an audio question. Those get sent to the tippy top of the list. However, send me your text question as well. The best part about this is we try to maintain as much anonymity as possible. Tell me whatever name you want to be called. I'll call you that name. And we'll put it up on a future episode. So let me tell you a little bit about Mubeena before we jump into this, and we'll just jump right into our conversation. By the way, if you are watching over at YouTube, since I'm now putting all these up on YouTube, you'll see my cockatiel hair. It's a little, I adjusted it slightly. This is just me being vain and just not knowing how to, what do I do with my hands? Anyways, I've had a face for radio for years, so here we are trying to put that up. But you'll see the mustache. It's doing something good today. It's like a full, both sides are participating and they're both doing the same thing what the other is supposed to be doing. So this is the saga that goes on in my life. You did not sign on to hear about me talk about my mustache, but here we are. All right, let me tell you about Mubeena, and then we're going to jump into it. All right, Mubeena Mirza is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in the treatment of OCD and anxiety disorders. She received training in the treatment of OCD at the UCLA OCD Intensive Outpatient Program. She is certified in cognitive behavioral therapy and incorporates mindfulness-based practices, including acceptance and commitment therapy into treatment. She is involved with the OCD of Faith and OCD Task Force and advocates for OCD awareness in the Muslim community. Mubeena's practice is based in Redondo Beach, California. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Mubeena Mirza. All right, Mubeena Mirza, thank you so much for joining us for the podcast today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate you and all the work that you do.
Of course. Well, I'm so excited to have you on to chat about religious scrupulosity specific to Muslims with scrupulosity, struggling with or anticipating or living through Ramadan.
Yes, thank you. It's such an important time. Ramadan is less than a month away. So here we go. A lot of us are anticipating it, getting ready for it, gearing up for it.
Right. That's right. Well, so we were talking about different things to anticipate, different things to think about for someone kind of struggling with that. And I just wanted to kind of start off with what is, for those who are not aware of what Ramadan is, why it's celebrated, the significance of it, and kind of what it looks like to celebrate it, just from a non-OCD perspective, and then to kind of incorporate like how can OCD grab onto that? I know it's going to be no surprise to anybody that it can grab onto anything, but in what ways do you see it grabbing on in the month of Ramadan or in the celebration of Ramadan? And what can someone do about it? Was that too much? That's too much.
That's okay. I'll just talk for a long time.
This is the thing. I'll just sit back here. I'll drink my coffee.
Get comfy, get cozy.
I will.
So Ramadan is the holiest month in the Muslim calendar. It's a special month where good deeds are elevated. So anything you do, it's multiplied by tens, maybe thousands of times. So good deeds are very important in Ramadan. But most kind of significantly or noteworthy, it's a month of fasting where a Muslim who's healthy and able to will fast from sunrise to sunset. So I don't know what that is right now. Maybe it's like 14 hours a day. We don't eat anything. We don't drink anything, not even water. And we abstain from things like smoking. If people smoke, we abstain from sex during the day. So basically, it's just kind of really depriving your body of its natural needs and urges throughout the day. So it's physically taxing, but it's wonderfully spiritual because there's a level of sacrifice that one does. And I've been talking to some of my Christian friends lately, and they tell me that there are like similar fasts that are done in Christianity too. And it's all about like sacrificing one's physical needs for a greater good. So there's that piece to it. It's also a time of community. So there's like extra prayers happening in the mosque where we go at night and we do all these extra prayers, and there's usually some delicious foods that are being passed around and people are hanging out afterwards. So it's a beautiful time of community at the mosque, but also it's very common that Muslims will break fast together. So we'll kind of, once we break the fast, we'll generally have a feast, lots of food, invite people over, meet at a restaurant, things like that. So it's also a very festive time. And it's a month of charity, so that this is when we see the GoFundMes and launch goods and all these things being passed around for like, spending in charity. And lastly, it's a month of so it's a month of community, it's a month of sacrifice, but it's a month of spirituality where people oftentimes spend time alone in prayer. Prayer at night. When they're alone, they're sitting in there praying to God and kind of working on that spiritual connection.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that kind of overview of what it looks like and kind of some of the high points of what somebody does, what the community does within that. There's so much within that even just the description, I could hear where OCD would grab onto that. You even said like, all right, you want to, you do the, presumably the 5 prayers during the day, but also you said there were other prayers that you would do. And you said, if you're able.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Even opening that door a little bit, I could hear, somebody then questioning, is this, am I able to do it? Am I kind of making a lie out of it, or if I'm unable to do it, or am I doing it right with the right behaviors or the right attitudes about it? In what ways historically have you seen folks, Muslim folks struggling with Ramadan? How is OCD grab onto it?
So I love that question because it kind of captures the nuance that we see in OCD. It's like beyond the obvious. So Muslims have a hard time with prayer, staying clean for prayer. And I think you and I talked about this last time before Ramadan. So staying clean for prayer and actually doing the prayer, things like that. But there's a more nuanced area that OCD latches onto. And real quick, just a side note, OCD will latch onto things that you care about. So if a Muslim cares about Ramadan, OCD will
go to town.
Can latch onto that. And if it's not latching onto that, doesn't mean that you don't care about Ramadan, but it can latch onto that.
Well, that backwards, that backdoor spike.
Right. Exactly.
The worst.
Exactly. So one way that OCD latches onto Ramadan is kind of the importance around this month. So it's very typical to think about this month and think, I'm going to try my best to make the most of it. I'm going to try my best to do extra prayers. If I'm physically on the brink, I can try to fast, but maybe if it's hard, I won't. So that's
Mhm.
how a person with OCD will approach it. I'm going to make an effort, but if I can't do it, it's okay. But with a person with OCD, there's a bit of perfectionism that might happen, or high expectancy of oneself that might happen. I need to and I have to make the most of every moment of this month. And if I don't, maybe I'm not an actual Muslim or a real Muslim or a good Muslim. Maybe I'm not a good person. So if I did prayer one night and then the next night I was too tired and I prioritize sleep, well, now I'm not a good enough Muslim, so now I have to do all these other compulsions to make up for it. So that's one way that OCD can latch on in a kind of sneaky way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can it's interesting that the way you talk about it, right? Because there's the 5 required prayers, and I'm assuming is the prayer that you're talking about where you might prioritize sleep over prioritizing that prayer. Is that included in that 5, or are these the extra?
A good question. Yeah. So Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day throughout the day. And there are extra prayers that we do, especially in Ramadan. There's ones that we do oftentimes in community, sometimes alone. So those are the extra prayers. And these can go on late into the night. So in Ramadan, we're not getting much sleep, right? We're praying late into the night sometimes, and then we're waking up early before the sun rises to eat. So what happens is people get tired. And we are allowed to give our bodies rest when we need it. We're allowed to say, you know what, I can't do all those extra prayers tonight.
Yeah, and when you're waking up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and then and 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning to eat, go back to sleep, wake up is that a loophole, or is that just a standard practice?
The waking up to eat?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, lots of folks will do it.
Okay.
I'm notoriously terrible at waking up to eat, but I get more tired than other people. I just don't have the right nutrition in my body then throughout the day. So you don't have to, but it's smart to eat before you start a 14-hour fast.
I would think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, the really good folks are like drinking electrolytes, chia seed pudding, and all these nutritious things. But yeah, some of us don't.
Some of us just go to town once the sun goes down.
Right.
Fair enough. So yeah. So I think it's important in what you already said is that to know that OCD is going to grab onto what you value the most, and especially with all the pressure. I'll put that in quotes, I suppose. All the perceived pressure placed on the month of Ramadan and the importance of it, the community component of it, and I can imagine the community component is going to contribute to a sense of kind of accountability. And it's like if I'm failing, I'm not only failing God, I'm failing my community.
Yeah.
But I mean, it can attack in a lot of different ways. So you sent me a list of 5 different ways or 5 things to kind of consider as someone's approaching Ramadan or is right in the middle of it, about ways that they can kind of ground themselves, accept the anxiety, kind of push through. So I'd love to just kind of go through those and hear what your thoughts were on what they can do, on what someone can do to help kind of make it work.
Thanks. Yeah, I kind of was thinking about, how to best support folks in Ramadan, and talking to my clients and helping them kind of anticipate this month that's coming up. So I would say in most general therapy for OCD, the first step is always acceptance. That comes with a bit of psychoeducation around OCD, acknowledgement that what you have is OCD. And it just is. That's how your brain is wired. There's not a lot you can do. We can't take out your brain and take a chunk out of it and say, now you don't have OCD. You have OCD, and that's okay. People are afflicted with different things. And Muslims believe that we're all kind of given different trials, right? And we're not given any trial more than we can bear. So with acceptance comes with an acknowledgement that your brain is wired to have that overactive alarm system in your brain. Every single person on this planet hopefully has an alarm system in their brain that helps them perceive threats and react to them. They don't, when there's a problem, they wouldn't be able to react, right? In California,
Right.
here we have earthquakes. And if the ground starts shaking, we jump into action, right? We know exactly what to do. Our alarm system works, and we jump into something that will keep us and those around us safe. But for a person with OCD, they perceive more threats than there actually are threats, right? And they react to more threats than there actually are threats.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of knowing that there's that pattern, right? You've got this way of thinking, and your brain's got this way of kind of perceiving the world around you, misperceiving dangers that may or may not be there, and over attributing dangers to places where there may not be any real danger.
Right.
Kind of knowing that that pattern's going to be there can really help someone kind of, is it to anticipate? Is it to shift away from? What can that awareness kind of do for that person, or how can someone take that awareness that they've got OCD and put that into a functional way for Ramadan?
Right. So what is really helpful, I think, with acceptance is kind of that distance from your thought or thought diffusion, right? This is something that is happening to me. It's part of my experience, but it's not necessarily true. So for example, if someone is fasting and they're taking a shower, they might get a thought, what if a drop of water went into my mouth by accident? And now I'm responsible for taking care of that. And so now I'm going to go ahead and do a ritual to feel safe, right? If someone feels that urge, feels that has that intrusive thought, feels that urge to do a compulsion, if they know and they recognize they have OCD, now they can at least acknowledge that, accept that this is likely OCD, and then work on kind of not doing the compulsive behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of working with and overcoming OCD is the awareness of what triggers are coming when you're getting that temptation to kind of go on over into anxiety land and respond to it through compulsions, and kind of saying, all right, I know where all these road signs are. I know that this historically has impacted me. So instead of going with that, I'm going to kind of, as I've talked about it before, it's like relying on your compulsive conclusion, meaning like trusting that, you are who you are. You're trusting God for who God is, and saying, I know what this is historically. So instead of going through the whole process to end with, that was unnecessary, I'm just going to cut to the chase and trust my past self with it.
Right.
A clunky way to say that, but there it is. There it is.
Right.
Yeah. So, is there more you wanted to add, or do you want to shift on to that second point?
Yeah.
Okay. So the second point you have on here is self-compassion.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So self-compassion is so important in working with OCD. The way I say it is that OCD is fueled by guilt and shame. OCD is fueled by guilt and shame. And an antidote to guilt and shame is self-compassion. All that compassion and empathy that we are readily willing to give other people, if we turn it inwards, then we aren't weighed down by that. So when we're talking about how to have self-compassion towards someone with OCD that's approaching Ramadan, or it is Ramadan, acknowledging how hard this moment is. And it's not hard because of anything you've done wrong, or it's not hard because of a lack of spirituality that you have. It's hard because the first point, you have OCD.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're going to have an added layer of difficulty in this month of strenuousness. So it's a really hard month, reminding yourself that if there are dispensations given to people who suffer from illness, including mental illness. So if you can't fast, it's okay. You're not expected to fast. If you can't do those extra prayers, it's okay. You don't have to do those extra prayers. So self-compassion also is acknowledging that maybe I can't do all these extra things that other folks are doing.
And I think that idea, and you and I have talked on, I think off the podcast about kind of dispensations and how that works. I imagine that some folks out there may be hearing different messages about dispensations, and some people might be hearing more hardline, no dispensations, you got to do it because Ramadan and you have to celebrate, versus folks who might have a different perspective. I mean, how common is it, or how common is it to have someone kind of wrapped up in, well, there might be dispensations for some, but there aren't dispensations for me?
Right. That sounds like the piece of hyper responsibility that comes into OCD, that I'm special, I'm different, dispensations don't matter for me. So there's that, and I want people to acknowledge that exists. And if that's happening, then talk to someone and get feedback, talk to a loved one. But when it comes to dispensation and receiving them, look, I don't give out dispensations religiously because I'm not qualified to do that. I don't know enough about religious rulings and text, right? I can't do that, even though I'm practicing Muslim. So when it comes to dispensation, if somebody is curious about that, I would recommend they go to a trusted religious leader, an imam, a sheikh, a sheikha, in order to get kind of dispensation if needed. But go to someone that understands mental health issues, because not everybody does. There are hardliners that don't take into account mental health, mental illness.
Right.
And what I'll say about that, if anybody is curious about how that fits into Islam, I can just plug 1 minute the work of Rania Awad at the Stanford Islamic Psychology Lab. She does a lot of work around mental health in the Islamic world over time, and she's done a lot of research into older texts around mental health. And what she's found is that, first of all, OCD was recognized in the 8th or 9th century in the Islamic world. And second of all, there were these wellness centers that existed that did holistic wellness for nutrition and physical health, but they also included sections for mental health and mental illness. And they used some of the techniques that we know now are evidence-based, including exposure and response prevention. So it is in our history, it is in our past, and part of self-compassion is owning our history and our past, that we have always recognized mental health and mental wellness in the Islamic world.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if anybody's out there who's struggling with that, look that person up. And if I can get that information, I'll try to put that on the episode page as well for that. That's just a fantastic resource. So the next point on here was, don't give into the urges.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So this gets into the nitty-gritty of working with OCD, right? So the first two were more conceptual. This is very a practical step. And we have to kind of understand the OCD cycle first. So the OCD cycle includes a trigger, an intrusive thought, a feeling of discomfort like anxiety, which leads to an urge to do a compulsion. Then you get the compulsive behavior, and then you get the temporary relief from the feeling, and that reinforces that whole cycle of OCD, and that's how people get stuck. So when you have this awareness and acceptance around your OCD, and now you're giving yourself all this compassion, and like you said, you have kind of a knowledge of when you're usually triggered, it's important to notice your urges to do a compulsive behavior, and then step back and maybe do the opposite, or just don't do that compulsive behavior and move on. So, for example, if a person has an urge to repeat part of the prayer, they have knowledge that typically during this portion of the prayer, reciting Surah Fatiha, when I say a certain letter, I'm now repeating over and over. As you enter in the prayer, you're knowing I'm going to enter that prayer and I'm not going to repeat as I typically do. What that's going to do, it's going to cut that OCD cycle off at where it matters, and it's going to help retrain your brain to learn that, hey, the thing I was worried about didn't actually happen. I'm fine. I can move on with my life.
Yeah. And does that still qualify as well if you are, going into a prayer and, I've talked to some folks who they'll get an intrusive thought of, a profane word or a sexual image pop into their head, and they'll want to go back and re-say that prayer just to do it right. That's still that advice, that guidance that you're talking about still applies to those situations, or would those be different?
So for your prayer to count, there's a minimal amount of requirements actually for a prayer to count. Now, a person with OCD will create all these new rules that I have to do all these extra things for my prayer to count, like having a pure mind, having pure thoughts during the prayer. That doesn't exist. It's a goal. It's a value we can kind of work towards. But it doesn't have to happen perfectly. So yes, your prayer absolutely will still count.
Okay, so you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Being permission to mess up and
Yeah,
have.
but also maybe not. So.
Wouldn't even be able to give them that. All right, so, and it's again, it's kind of trusting that God knows you, He knows your thoughts, and knows what you're struggling with. Right, as you said, everyone has these tests. So if that's your test, all right, that's your thought. How do you deal with this best? And perfectionism ultimately, it pulls you away from saying that prayer, trying to do it perfectly, saying it over and over and over again. It's not bringing you closer to God. It's bringing you closer to anxiety.
Yes. And I've noticed that when people get caught up in their their anxiety and their rituals, it might even pull them away from the prayer, where now, they're not feeling their prayer. They're not enjoying it. They're not feeling a spiritual aspect of it. They might even miss prayers because they were still stuck doing the last one.
And now they're sinning again because now they're not saying the prayer, or they're not saying it with the right heart behind it, or the right feel. So now they need to say it with the right feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
It snowballs onto itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, actually, to jump off that to your fourth point, your penultimate point, if you will. Sorry, my dad made us learn that word when we were in elementary school, and it was impossible for us to say it because it's a hard. Anyways, now it's in my head. Anyways, so allow for uncertainty and discomfort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So when you don't give in to urges, what's left? Uncertainty and discomfort. So a lot of the work is allowing for that to be there. A person without OCD feels uncertainty regularly, right? I don't know for certain if my prayers are accepted. I'm not talking to God regularly and having a back and forth conversation with him where he's like, yes, that prayer was really good, Mubeena. So I have uncertainty. So we allow for uncertainty because in most things in life, we can't get it, right? And a person with OCD also feels a lot of discomfort when they're doing things on their day-to-day life that their OCD has latched onto. Yeah. So by allowing for this, we allow ourselves to move on away from our compulsive behaviors and into our valued actions, into the things that are actually important to us. We're not meant to pray all day, right? We're not meant to spend our days washing, getting ready for the prayer, then actually praying. And we're not meant to have certainty that our fasts are absolutely perfect, that no drop of water could have gotten in. We're meant to actually do the things we're required to do and then engage in life. Go out and be with family, go out and do work, be productive, back, do other things. So that's where we move into away from uncertainty, allow for it, move away from it, and into the things that are important to us.
I love that. What I also really want to highlight is you said something so important. You said you don't even have certainty about whether or not your prayers are, you did them right or you did them wrong. There's a natural level of uncertainty. But it doesn't say that you don't want certainty. It just means that we live with the reality and the forced reality of uncertainty. Like, yeah, it would be nice if after every prayer we got a message from God that said, nailed that one.
Yeah.
Right. Or the way that we're reading our, our scriptures, whatever it might be, and saying like, yeah, you're interpreting this right. Like, that'd be nice. But unfortunately, we don't get that. And that's not for lack of want. It's just the reality that we're in. So we have to accept that reality of the unknown, and we round up and do our best.
Exactly. Rounding up it's so big. I mean, and then that's part of our understanding religiously too, that it's about the bigger picture. It's not about every single little movement. It's about kind of the summation of good deeds. And I was talking to a client the other day. I mean, when we're talking about scrupulosity, it would be great if God came down and said, yeah, this is the right religion. Yeah, good job. You chose the right one. All right. Yeah, I nailed it. And then from thereafter, everything, I did was I was told if it was right or wrong, but that's not the way he created it. And so part of acceptance around this is trusting this is the system the way it was created. Uncertainty is part of that system, and it's okay to be uncertain.
And that can absolutely, I encourage folks in that to kind of recognize that as a reality, right? I mean, I often work with Christian clients, and we talk about, I mean, there's a bajillion different denominations of Christianity. So which is the right one?
Yeah.
I don't know, and I don't know, or if any of them are doing it right. And I think they're maybe doing it right in parts, but yeah, it'd be nice if they're like, those guys are doing it right. Well, then I'll do that one. But unfortunately, we are doing the best that we can, and we round up in the hopes of that what we're doing is ultimately, honoring God and pursuing the spirituality, pursuing the religion that we have, and again, doing our best, and then seeing how it works.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll find out in the end, right?
We will, or we won't, or there's nothing.
Or there's nothing.
So, enjoy that new obsession, everybody. That was not meant to trigger anybody, but well, I'll get the emails. Anyways, so, all right. So the last point, since I know you probably have people, I got people at the next hour. So the last point you have here is therapy and medication if needed.
Yeah. Well, I'm a proponent that if you've got OCD, seek help.
Yeah.
It's out there. There are therapists who are specialized in treating this, who do exposure and response prevention, who use acceptance and commitment therapy to treat OCD. And talking to a therapist who is culturally competent, who understands Islam, or at least knows what they don't know, so they can seek kind of the guidance as needed, is highly recommended. Lots of folks need to be on medication too, so finding a psychiatrist that can help with that. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's not a sign of spiritual weakness. As I've mentioned before, this is part of our history and part of our tradition, so go do it. I understand accessibility though. Some folks listening to this might not have kind of the access to care, so there's a lot of resources out there, self-help books for OCD to kind of walk yourself through the steps. If you've got religious scrupulosity, whether you're Muslim, Christian, or anything else, it can be treated as any theme of OCD through exposure and response prevention.
And treating it like a mental health issue, not as a spiritual issue.
Yes. Hallelujah. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest sticking point, is seeing these obsessions, viewing them as a result of, in the manifestation of OCD, a diagnosable, treatable mental health disorder, not as a manifestation and a sign of your spiritual weakness, of your failing, of your persistent and unaddressed sin. It is a mental health issue. So when we treat it that way, if we view it that way, we can treat it that way. And there are people out there like yourself who are, who know the faith, who care about somebody's faith, want their faith to thrive, and want to address the mental health issues that are impacting that. They're out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they will hopefully kind of be sensitive to cultural issues. I know a lot of Muslims that are thinking about treatment for OCD are worried about, will this person push me to do an exposure that's not acceptable? just find someone that you can have those conversations with.
Mhm.
They could hopefully be asking you, is this acceptable in your religious practice or not? And every Muslim's different. So I do that all the time. I'm sure you
Mhm.
do that with your clients too, right?
Absolutely.
Is this what I practice this way, but is this within your understanding? And
Mhm.
having that back and forth is absolutely possible.
Yeah, I feel like we talked a little bit about this during our first conversation about Muslims group, about how to find a therapist who's going to be sensitive to your faith. And the reality is that that therapist, even if they are a practicing Muslim themselves, they might practice things ever so slightly differently. And
Mhm.
our job as a therapist isn't to make your faith our faith.
Yeah.
It's to help you in your faith thrive as best it can, without the impact, as minimizing the impact of OCD on it. And that's, that's the hard part in all of it. But that's ultimately what we're trying to get at here.
Right. So therapy or self-help should all
Hmm.
get you closer to practicing the religion in the way that's meaningful to you. And that includes practicing Ramadan in a way that's meaningful to you, and however that looks for you. My Ramadan is different than my husband's Ramadan, and it's different than my cousin's Ramadan, my sister's Ramadan. We all have different ones. And for my Ramadan, it's going to be a little bit different than my client's Ramadan. And
Hmm.
that's all good. And just having faith that we're doing the best we can with what we've got.
Right, right. And I mean, and I've said before, now is the best time in history to have OCD, in the sense that there's so much information out there, so much free information, so much accessible information. I mean, that's one of the reasons put out this podcast and love having folks like Mubeena on to talk about this, so we can get this information out there to folks who need it. There's the IOCDF main conference that happens once a year. There is the specific faith and what is it called? The
OCD.
faith
Mhm.
OCD conference. So it's, as you can imagine, just faith and OCD stuff. And for both of those, if there's a financial issue, there are scholarships available to both. And you just have to reach out to the folks who are running it, and I'm sure have a conversation with them. But if that's your obstacle, reach out. But there's tons of information and tons of good folks out there. So I encourage folks to avail themselves to those options.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to add at the tail end of this? What is
Just
the thing that's going to fix everybody? Ready, go.
oh, okay. Oh
Yeah.
boy. Okay. Well, um, listen to Kevin's podcast. A.
Obviously, if you're hearing that, well done. You're doing it. Good job.
Good. I just wish everybody a happy, joyous, blessed Ramadan. Um, and all my hope and compassion, it goes out to everybody listening to this, whether you're a person with OCD, a faith leader, or a person helping somebody with OCD. You're in the right place, and just stick with it.
Yeah. Where can people hear more about you?
Um, I have a private practice, Beach City CBT in Redondo Beach. I'm also involved with the IOCDF Faith and OCD Task Force, where I advocate for awareness in the OCD community around things like this. And I do a monthly support group on Stick with the Ick for Muslims. It's specifically for Muslims or anybody that's interested in talking about Islam and OCD. It's
Yeah.
free. Yeah.
Check out that group. So the whole Stick with the Ick group that Katie O'Dunn put together, excuse me, Dr. Katie O'Dunn put together. It's a great resource for anybody with scrupulosity. There are tons of groups, tons of information, so you can check that out. Task Force sounds official. Is there a badge?
We have entire costumes that we wear with capes. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I kind of want to see, but that's a separate conversation. That sounds fun. Anyhow, so everybody check out Mubeena's information, check out her stuff. You can check out the previous episode that we had with her on, so you can listen to that. But otherwise, Mubeena, thank you so much for taking your time to share your knowledge, your passion about this, and helping people move forward in their life.
Of course. Thank you for everything you do.
Of course. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the FearCast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at FearCastPodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@FearCastPodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at FearCastPodcast on Instagram. If you like the FearCast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the FearCast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to FearCastPodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.